Welcome back to our video series where our live panel of therapists answer the questions you've always wanted to ask a therapist. If you're watching for the first time, be sure to check out our previous videos. Today we have Courtney, Heather, Jackie, Tammy, Lauren, and myself, I am Stephanie. Our first question is, how do you guide a patient to make a change or come to a decision without telling them what they should do?
With my magical powers.
Well, I think that the idea would be to get the client to identify what the struggles in their life are currently and whether or not a change needs to happen from there. Identifying really what the difficulty is and how that's playing out in their lives and what they want to change about that.
Yeah, I think that identifying goals in the beginning, where would you like your life to go, in what direction, what do you want to change, and then figuring out what the barriers to that are and coming up with ideas and solutions. And sometimes it's just changing behaviors and sometimes it's changing our thoughts and feelings. It's kind of like we can kind of come at it from all angles, but it's really a process more than anything. It's just and sometimes that process goes really quick and sometimes it takes a really long time to get to the end goal.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like the client being able to, like Jackie said, identify what is my biggest thing, my goal, my biggest problem that I'm wanting to change, whether it's circumstantial, something more, cerebral, where it's like your thought processes. And then also huge is the motivation, for the client, like what are the motivating factors? What are the things that are going to work for you? Because it's not like there's just one technique or approach. There's so many. So figuring out what resonates for you as far as altering behaviors and things in your life. So yeah, there's I think the motivation piece is a big factor as well.
I think I think it's more meaningful when people create their own goals. And I can certainly, and I've said this to many adolescent in particular, I have all these ideas in my head for things that, might be helpful for you, but unless there's something that you care about, my goals for you are completely meaningless. It has to come from them. They have to want it and they have to be able to look at it. And like Courtney said, that can be hard and messy. But helping get them there helping them figure out their own goals is much more meaningful than me creating a list of things I want them to work on.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of quoting music lyrics in session. And so there's an Avett Brothers lyric that says, if it matters to you, it matters to me. So that's sort of like my mantra when we're coming up with goal setting. And I'm always super careful to clarify that I'm not imposing some of my values or goals onto the other person. Checking in, is this what matters to you? Because it matters to me, but I don't want to, it's like, I don't want to put my own values or characteristics onto somebody else.
Going back to the motivation piece, that plays a huge part in it. I think it was at a training, there was a distinction between saying, I won't do something versus I can't do something. And the meaning behind that, if you truly can't do something, there's no one in the world that can help you change that thing. But if it's, I won't do this, it's a little bit different. There is something that can be done. So that's where the motivation and that desire plays a part. And again, what changes do you want? Having the client identify their goals.
Just to piggyback on that, I think that part of the process of therapy is when we identify goals and then people are not reaching them, figuring out the why. What is the resistance? Because usually there's there's a reason why they're not doing it outside of therapy. There's a reason why they're coming to us. So there's usually some maybe fear or some resistance to doing it on their own. So identifying, okay, so this is a can't or a won't, or what's interfering with us moving forward with the process. Kind of like almost with a machete, like kind of knocking down the leaves so that the person sort of sees the path more clearly. But also recognizing in order to make change, you have to do things sometimes that are scary.
I think about the question too, where it says, how do you guide the patient or client through it? I feel like that's where we've talked about in the past sessions too, about like coming alongside of them. So I feel like we're guiding them because we're coming alongside of them.
Next, we have, how does a therapist determine a person's progress?
Yeah, I think there's rating scales, there's collateral, there's observable changes in like say grades or attendance at school or engagement in social activities or engagement with the family. But then there's just things that we can observe in session, which is how they present, their facial expression, their interactions with us. I went to a training once where a psychiatrist was talking about how do you know when the meds are working? And he said basically like session after session, they'll come in and they just like go spew like, this is what's going on. Blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden one day they'll come in and he'll say, how are you? And they'll say, good, how are you? And so it's sort of like that moment of like, they're like out of it, you know, where they're just kind of more present. And a lot of times in session, they'll run out of things to talk about. And then we kind of reflect on, well, should we drop down in frequency? You're doing great. Let's see how you do after 2 to 3 weeks, and then come back and we'll see how things are going.
I think it also depends on what they're coming in for. I know generally speaking, if I'm seeing somebody that's struggling with depression or anxiety, I will do frequent rating scales. So I have forms that I'll give them regarding symptoms and severity of symptoms, like the beginning, you know, middle of treatment, and then towards the end, just to kind of give them feedback about, like, look, like this is what you're reporting, because they don't always remember, right? Some people can't identify how bad it really was for them when it was bad if they're feeling great right now. The same goes for medication. So if we're talking about initiating medication, I will, as much as I can, start with a rating scale before the medication starts, and then 2 weeks later, a month later, just to identify specifically which symptoms have changed, if any.
Sometimes in session, in the beginning phase of therapy, I will ask, how will we know if therapy is working? What will be different for you? And sometimes people have an idea of what that may look like, and sometimes they don't. Either is completely fine. But setting expectations for yourself, what progress may look like to you, is really important, because you're in the driver's seat, right? This is your life, the changes that you want to make for yourself. So having an idea of what that looks like, I would say I kind of rely on the client to really determine, you know, if there is or isn't progress.
I think that's a great way to state it for goal setting, like working backwards, like how will you know that you're better, and establishing goals off of that.
I also think dependent on the client, a secondary report, meaning from family members or partners or whatnot, you know, inviting them in periodically throughout treatment, and having them identifying any changes that they've seen in the individual receiving the treatment. You know, obviously that should never be the only deciding factor of progress, because they're not in it themselves or observing it, but having that as collateral information can definitely be helpful.
All right, our next question, Heather, you might enjoy this one. Can I curse during a therapy session?
Absolutely.
Can I?
I think it goes to saying, like, just being an authentic person, you know? I mean, just being authentic and real, and it's totally okay to curse. I mean, I have had, and it's totally the intent of the curse too, right? Like sometimes I feel like swear words are used to exclamate things. But I have had like a scenario where a kid was using it in an angry, accusatory way, which is a completely different dynamic. But while describing something, not at a person, absolutely.
I want people to be as authentic as possible in session. And if their authentic way of expressing themselves is through swearing, I absolutely want them to use their language of choice. Again, I agree with Heather that sometimes it depends on if it's appropriate or not. If it's in an aggressive way towards a family member, maybe not. But if it's just a recounting of a story and expressing anger over what happened, absolutely. I also think there's usefulness in swearing with, with using exposure response prevention, especially with people who have fears around, being wrong or saying something bad or scrupulosity. So getting them to swear in session is actually a goal. We work towards it.
I think of when my children were young and they were just learning to speak, and I would say, use your words, and so when we encourage people to share with us, we sort of have to take the good and the bad, and the bad meaning words that people have bad connotations with. But in my head, I think of it as cathartic, right? If it's not at somebody specifically, they're clearly showing you their emotion. Why would we hinder that, right?
Yeah, it goes back to that like not feeling judged space, right? Like you wouldn't walk up to a stranger and drop the F-bomb in the middle of how was your day? But, I might, but that's a totally different story.
I like to mimic clients' language in a way because it's like I want to speak their, everybody has sort of their own specific sort of way of languaging their problems, and so I think it's really therapeutic if they swear and I reflect back with a swear. It's just this moment of like feeling heard and feeling that I recognize how deeply you feel this.
I think that also gives them a perspective of us being human too, right? We are not above anybody. So if we're reflecting that, we can share that, we can empathize with that. We're just like you, right?
I think it depends on the therapist too. Some therapists might not feel comfortable swearing, but they might feel totally comfortable with somebody swearing in session. Heather feels quite comfortable swearing.
Very, very much. But I also know like who I can and cannot use that language with, right? And it definitely, like, I just think of generationally, the older, I have quite the range. I have a handful of significantly older adults in their 60s and 70s. And typically they would not, I mean, if they say, damn, they're apologizing to me. And so obviously in that scenario, in that relationship, I'm very cautious with my words. But I find that the teenagers actually, I think, connect better when you speak their lingo, like Courtney said. They feel like you're more real and authentic, and they're, sometimes used to a different relationship with older people. Like they think of their teachers, and obviously that wouldn't be acceptable in a school setting. But there's a big boundary between a teacher and a student, a much different boundary in a therapy session. It's much more intimate. And so I think you can use swear words therapeutically. At least that's what I tell myself as I drop the F-bomb in session.
So yeah, even though I may swear with my teenage patients, they still sometimes look at me like I'm a total dork when I say something. They're like, no, that's not how you use that.
It's interesting you brought that up, Courtney, with some therapists not swearing. I like asking the question, reflecting on myself. I don't really swear very often. I don't have anything against it. It's not like a part of my vocabulary, I guess. It doesn't come out very often. So I think it is appropriate to swear in a session. Like a client is not going to offend me by expressing themselves unless it is done in a kind of an aggressive manner, then where that behavior may not be appropriate anymore. But how we talk, the words we use, that's just a part of who we are. So if you swear, you're gonna be swearing in your therapy session. So my final question to everyone, what did you guys think of the questions that we received from those who did submit the questions?
I thought they were good questions. I would say they're pretty typical concerns. The vast majority of them are pretty typical concerns for someone who's entering into therapy. And I think they'd all be really great conversation starters with your therapist. Like, how do we know I'm making progress? How do I know if we're connecting? I thought they were really appropriate, good questions.
For somebody who's never been in therapy, they, what goes on behind closed doors is kind of a mystery, right? It's sort of, if you have nothing to compare it to other than what you see on TV or in the movies, it probably seems like a very weird thing to try out. So I think the questions were awesome to sort of get a gauge of, what does it look like? What does it feel like? How do you get me to talk about myself? Are you going to diagnose me? All those good questions. Can I swear? So hopefully this will open the door to people trying it out who have been hesitant and curious, but give them an opportunity to give it a go.
And I think that question of can I swear, there's a much bigger question that I heard was, can I be me? Is it okay to be me in the session? And of course, that's the point, right?
So that wraps up our questions for today. For our viewers, thank you for spending your time with us. We hope this series was helpful to you and that you might feel more comfortable seeking therapy services. And I also want to give a big thank you to all of our therapists as well.